world of RC racing as a business is much more ruthless than most people give it credit for. It's very much a feast or famine type market due to its size, and where some brands really take off and are very successful, others really don't get the recognition they may want or even deserve. That's why today I'm going to try and shed some light on some of the brands out there that seem to do everything right, but quite simply don't get a whole lot of usage in the mainstream. Before we begin, a few rules. I'm only really going to be talking about RC brands that pertain to off-road RC racing, as that's the most popular form of racing currently. That means any brands that have dabbled in RC off-road buggies and trucks may be included. Also, I'll mainly be talking about companies that make cars, not tires or anything like that. Lastly, I'll only really be talking about 10 scale and 8 scale cars, as those are once again the most popular forms of off-road racing here in the United States. Before we begin, I'd like to thank this video's sponsors RC Trophy Chasers, Cow RC, and AAMA Hobbies. Anything you guys purchase using the links in the description below will directly support me as well. The first brand I want to talk about is a brand that's been around for a little while, and that's Kyosho. Once upon a time, Kyosho was by far the most popular brand in 8 scale and had a really good following in 10 scale as well. At a certain point though, due to a multitude of internal and outside factors, people began jumping ship. Kyosho went bankrupt and only a few people really hung on to them for the long haul, especially in the US. The thing is though, Kyosho cars never really changed in terms of quality or feel. The MP10 was released, which was still worked on by Yuichi Kanai, and the quality of parts were still very good, and the prices were good too. The only negative connotation that Kyosho garnered was the fact that compared to other buggies on the market, they were a little bit less durable. However, the Inferno still drove good, the parts, where not abundant, still were able to be found at most hobby shops and websites like AAMA, and Kyosho to this day has the most IFMARS 8 scale wins of any manufacturer, with 8 wins in total. Even with all of this, people are still hesitant to get back into Kyosho with any real momentum. Of course, there's still Ryan Lutz and Naofi Lohm, but Kyosho is still very much a secondary company that you see here and there, but with no real field dominance like you'd see with Techno, Associate, or even S-Works. Overall, Kyosho is still very much a worthwhile brand that I think should get more attention. However, Kyosho isn't the only company with a treasured past that struggles to make a mark in the modern RC world. Back in the days of RC10s and Kyosho Scorpions, there was also Yokomo, and in 4-wheel drive, or mod as it was known back then, they were the kings. Yokomo's history is an interesting one that I'll save for another time, but what I will say is that when it comes to 10-scale racing, Yokomo was very much a major player with no matter where they went. They partnered up with Associated for a little while, as those who ran Team Associated 2-wheel drive buggies would run Yokomo 4-wheel drive buggies. Even after this, Yokomo was still a player at the top level of 10-scale RC, even winning a Worlds in 2-wheel drive and 4-wheel drive 10 scale in China back in 2017 with Ryan Mayfield back when he raced for Yokomo still. These days though, Yokomo is nowhere near the level of popularity they used to be even a few years ago. You'll be hard pressed to find Yokomo at really any club level races, and only a few at a national level events. This is a shame because there's a lot of history behind Yokomo as a whole, and their cars are still pretty damn good all things considered, arguably being better than mainline brands of Associated TLR in the US. Now I am aware that Yokomo is popular in places like Southeast Asia and a little bit on the West Coast, and very much in the on-road drift scene. In fact, it can be argued that Yokomo's on-road and drift program pays for their off-road program. Whether or not you should actually give Yokomo a chance entirely depends on your desire to want to try something different from the norm, but not too different. The Super Off-Road and Master Off-Road buggies are proven designs that work on pretty much all surfaces, so if you're the kind of person who enjoys being a little different, and you don't mind buying a lot of spares in bulk, be sure to give Yokomo a chance. Moving on into 8th scale territory, there were 4 different brands other than Kyosho that I could have included for various reasons. WIRC, or Work, is a choice simply because I personally don't see them very often, but they do have pockets of popularity here and there. Sparco was another car manufacturer that for a time was poised to take the East Coast by storm, but didn't really do so to the extent that a lot of people would have expected. The 2 other brands I decided to choose were mostly there because of the effort put in by their respective companies to push their car into the mainstream, or their attempts to try something different. And the first of these 2 companies would have to be AAMA. AAMA is a Taiwanese company with heavy influence from the UK. In the past, they were really in the background of most RC racing events, with their most notable claim to fame, at least here in the US, was that Ryan Lutz raced for them for a period of time. AAMA seemed to understand that in order for them to survive in this field, they needed to do something out of the norm design-wise, and so they came up with the N1. Now, the N1 isn't entirely a brand new design, as there had been some attempts at a similar design to this intense scale, but none successful for the long term. Now, the N1 didn't have an entirely easy birth. Many different iterations and changes were made to the car that I went over in my AAMA N1E videos, but in the end it worked out, and what we were left with was a very capable buggy that had a lot of potential in the right hands on multiple different track types, shown in part by drivers like Will McIver, doing very well in many different races around the country at a very high level. These days, the N1's design has sort of become a signature for the AAMA as a whole. As soon as there will be a 2-wheel drive 10-scale buggy and even a truggy, maybe, with the same shock setup. The main reason I think AAMA is underrated is twofold. For one, I just don't see too many in the United States or really anywhere outside the UK. And two, just the amount of people actively seem to hate on the N1's design for little to no reason other than spite. At this point, I think AAMA is sticking to their signature design out of spite for all the hate they receive for the actual design. If you already own an AAMA or plan to own one, I'd be sure to check out their Discord server as well. I'll be sure to link it in the description below. If you want to be different in pretty much every single way possible, and don't mind learning a new platform that's different from the others, I'd give AAMA a shot. Trust me, if I can make it work, you can too. The other 8th scale exclusive brand I wanted to talk about in this video is a brand that for a time a lot of people seem to meme on principle. By process of elimination, you've probably figured it out, it's Mako. Mako is a brand owned and run by the Invisible Speed author JQ. JQ has a bit of a reputation that I'll get into in another time, but for now let's focus on his creation, Mako. Let's begin with the car itself, the MX-8 and MX-8E. Both of these cars, particularly the Nitro MX-8, have been in development for a long while, and there was a lot of push from JQ about the MX-8 car being one of, if not the most tunable buggies on the market. The main selling point of Mako though isn't the car, it's the membership program. I'll save the details of the membership and what I think about that for a future video. But to make it a brief, it works something like this. For the price of about $350 a year, $350 US dollars that is, you get a few perks like access to the Mako Discord server, access to prototype and pre-prototype cars to test like still being developed truggy, and prototype parts to test on your car. You also get a heavy discount both on cars and parts as well, so depending on how much you buy a year, the membership may actually save you a few bucks. Lastly, you get your name engraved onto your chassis, if you wish, which is a nice touch. Now, the more observant of you guys out there may feel like I'm holding back a little bit on the general information on Mako, and that's for a reason. For now though, what I will say is that if you wish to take your racing very seriously, and want to feel like you're part of a community of like-minded drivers who also take RC racing seriously, Mako is probably for you. Before we get into the final underrated brand, why don't we look at some honorable mentions. PR Racing is a cheaper brand that mainly makes 10-scale cars. They tend to be very cheap compared to other brands on the market, and they do this by saving costs in places like packaging and such. However, the quality of the parts used by PR tends to be very good, and their cars are very versatile as well. They also tend to be more popular in the Southeast Asia and West Coast of the United States. Secondly, I'd like to talk briefly about Caster Racing. I know very little about Caster and their history, which is the main reason I didn't dedicate a full section to them. What I will say is really good about them is their simplicity, durability, and adjustable C-hubs. Oh yes. The last brand I wish to talk about is a brand I haven't really given a fair chance for a long while, that being Serpent. Serpent is a brand that has been very obscure to me for a very long time, only popping up here and there across the pond in places like Scotland, and very rarely at the US in very large races. It was then I was given the chance to look at one close up by a friend of mine, Ryland Smith. He had both the Nitro buggy and E-buggy on hand, and I must say that from the initial impressions, it was a very high quality car. It handled well in the demanding North Georgia shootout layout at the Robin Arena, and it did pretty well at Cheehaw as well. Serpent doesn't just make 8-scale buggies though, they also make 10-scale buggies as well. What you're seeing on screen right now is one of my friends and patrons' Serpent Spider SRX2 on an AstroTurf track. They also have a belt-driven 4-drive buggy and a short course truck. It also helps that if you know where to look, you can find a lot of support for Serpent cars setup-wise from various sources, and you can find Serpent parts on many big RC retailers like AAMA and Hobbies for example. Serpent also have a lot of pedigree from drivers like Billy Easton backing them. On top of all that, the Serpent kits for off-road tend to be very reasonably priced and very well made. You can find a Serpent Spider team kit for $50 less than an LD3 Schumacher or Team Associated B7. The only thing I'd personally worry about with the Serpent would be the SRX4, as it's a bit of an older belt design and that can be a bit of a turnoff for many. However, I can't personally see anything wrong with Serpent, the brand as a whole, in the world of off-road racing other than part support, which, to be honest, could be said about literally any of the brands I've mentioned here previously. Like I said in the beginning of this video, RC racing can be a very tough business to get into and stay relevant in. The companies I've listed prior I truly believe are worth people's time, especially now with a lot of the top brands getting a little bit complacent and comfortable. Kyosho, Yoko, AAMA, Mako, PR Racing, Schumacher in the United States, and Serpent are hungry to succeed right now, and I think that's when brands tend to be at their best. If you have any other brands that you consider underappreciated, or perhaps you'd like me to do an overrated brands video, be sure to let me know in the comment section below. Also, if you enjoyed the video, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more. Also, if you'd like to support me financially, you can subscribe to my Patreon where I post updates and teasers to my next videos. Speaking of which, I'd like to thank my active patrons Michael Williams, RC World Discord server, Casey Nix, Ben Reeves, Dave Armstrong, Rob Bedingfield, Caden Merks, Ian Petrie, Salvador Rivera, Zach Hawes, Jeffrey Coons, James D. Anderson, Shane T. Ruth, Gable Barber, and especially Morrison Watt. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.